Welcome back to the SEO Weekly, where queries are weird, advice is controversial, and everything depends. I'm your host, Garrett Sussman of the iPullrank agency, and this week, why are companies still balking at investing in SEO? Is Google documentation problematic? Can we trust it? What the hell's wrong with it? And what if you could put search volume data into your Google Search Console? Well, that'd be pretty neat. Let's dive in. So first off, early February, we've got a reminder that the page experience for desktop is being updated. Now, it had already been rolled out for mobile. We knew this is coming. Maybe it's not even that big a deal, but Malte Ubel, who is a software engineer for Google, sent out a reminder via tweet. He said, page experience ranking in Google search based on Core Web Vitals on desktop, so laptops, tablets, and the 523.94 remaining actual desktop computers is going out next month. Metric threshold are the same as on mobile. So things like LCP and FID, the way that you evaluate that and whether you're kind of good to go in the eyes of Google are going to be the same for the mobile version of your website as it is for this upcoming desktop. Now, is this a big deal? We're going to touch on this a little later because Patrick Stox, who stopped by for Rankable yesterday on the podcast, said, you know what, maybe Core Web Vitals shouldn't be an SEO thing. Maybe it should be championed by UX web developers. What do you think? Barry Schwartz wrote a small little opinion piece on Search Engine Land all about announcements regarding updates, why we don't get maybe a big heads up on big announcements versus, some things that are a little more minor, like these smaller core announcements. And it was actually touched on more in depth by John Mueller, Martin Splitt, and Gary Elis on Search Off the Record podcast by these Googlers. They discussed this whole idea about, whether it makes sense, whether it even matters that, most SEOs will be able to pick up that something's changed. So do they need to make an announcement? My personal opinion is that with all of the different factors that could impact why your rankings fluctuate, whether or not it's obvious, I think definitively validating the fact that there's been an update is helpful for SEOs. It's just another piece of information that can support why they've seen their rankings change. So, it's a really great podcast for you to check out that they kind of discuss and debate about, and they talk about a few other interesting topics there. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think that Google should make an announcement about any sort of updates that they make? On Twitter, there was a small back and forth. So Ori Zilberstein asked John Mueller, he said, whether toxic non-indexed backlinks hurt your site, to which John Mueller responded, if they're not indexed, I wouldn't assume the links do anything. So, basically what John's saying here is if Google is not actually indexing the site, then they're not considering those URLs as impacting ranking factors. So in the idea of them being toxic links, I don't think you can necessarily take that definitively. I appreciate John responding to it, but as always, do your own due diligence. If someone wants to set up an experiment and check that out, that'd be really interesting to see. But he did say that on Twitter, so, he didn't say, oh, you don't have to worry about non-indexed toxic URL links. But it's another piece of information that you can take it for what it's worth. On the Twitter threads and tweets front, Jens Oliver Meiert, who worked for Google, shared a little story about the origin of, the most recent iteration of Google's 404 page. Neat little blurb about how they wanted to update it. They were going to invest some more resources into it, but naturally they got sidetracked. But one thing that he wanted to change that he got in there was an update to the copy that says, that's all we know when it comes to a error. Obviously you want to figure out why something is not showing up on Google, but there are so many different contextual situations, and Google was planning on providing more info there, but they didn't get to it. So a little call out, they kind of poking fun of themselves of that they don't really know the answer. That's all we know. So there's that little story. I appreciate Jen sharing that. Bigger Twitter thread came out from Eli Schwartz where he made the statement. He posed the idea that I find it shocking that companies are willing to spend millions of dollars on paid advertising each month, but then think $10,000 is a bit too much for SEO. And this theme has come up frequently in the SEO world, where it does feel like an undervalued channel. It's tough because it doesn't typically have the same sort of obvious attribution that paid does. Like, you don't always know definitively that especially in like B2B with longer sales cycles, but like that a conversion comes from organic. You can do it, but it's not as easy, and there are a lot of different touch points. So the SEO and paid and just general digital marketing community were sounding off in response to Eli's tweet. It kind of struck a nerve, and some of the interesting responses that caught my eye were, for instance, Jenny Stradling thinks that I've said this exact thing so many times. We had a client who had a $500,000 paid ad budget in-house, and once we, the SEO agency, audited it, showed they'd actually saved money just by turning it off. Of course, by the time they started SEO, it was too little, too late. They are gone now. Meanwhile, Daniel K. Chung said, perhaps we as the practitioners, consultant, or vendor have failed at communicating or selling the solution. It's easy to blame quote unquote them, yet they're the ones we want to earn their business/trust from. So he takes the onus on us, the sellers of SEO. Benji Hyam says, from all the comments, sounds like the main problem is expertise. 1, people don't know how to track ROI from content, kind of referencing what I was saying. 2, people don't know how to build a strategy that drives leads. 3, people don't know how to scale a content program. Sounds like opportunity to me. And I hear you, Benji. It's like if other people are struggling with making that, argument as the value of SEO, then agencies and consultants, if you're good at it, you can like slide in there and make the case and convince some people. Meanwhile, Kamal Ahuja says paid advertising comes with an inevitable flat line after a certain point. Organic can drive targeted traffic to your website from so many sources and keep you hovering on top for high volume keywords for years. It's a no-brainer, people. Invest in content and SEO. And in a lot of ways with this type of audience, I really believe that she was preaching to the choir here. We all agree. I mean, I hope so. If you're working in SEO, you believe in the channel. But SEO has value, whether or not the kind of common sense understanding of it as a channel being worth investing in changes. That'll be interesting to see in 2022. I mean, is SEO dead? I don't think it is, but maybe some of the big wigs at big C-suite enterprises do. They don't, but we got to continue to, nudge them along. Cyrus Shepard, who was actually on the Rankable podcast a couple weeks ago, put out an updated, just really awesome 22 smart Google SEO tips for 2022. 22, love it. Good work, Cyrus. Anyway, it was really cool. Just broke it down in terms of, and it was under the advanced SEO. There were some more advanced tips there, which I appreciated, but brought it down into sections. So some of the ones that stood out to me from Cyrus were, for instance, on-page SEO, use FAQ schema. Still valuable for a lot of people who just don't do it. Like, take the time, set it up. Even if you can get like 1 or 2 extra rich snippets that show up in the search results, FAQ schema is huge. He said for link building, reduce your redirects. Google SEO, so favicon optimization, which I laugh, but honestly, it's a very valid point that he makes, especially on mobile, where the favicon and the logo of the favicon will appear right next to all of the SERPs. Whether or not it impacts your rankings, that visual definitely helps your search and your click-through rate. So, people are more likely to click through if they see like that visual image there. I think he said that it was like 1 to 2% improvement. So, and then finally, SEO career tips, learn GA4. Another one a couple months ago now, Krista Seiden was on talking all about the importance of Google Analytics 4, how it is very different from Universal Analytics, and at some point Google will depreciate the Universal Analytics and make everyone have to use GA4. It's something that's worth learning. I think there's opportunity there, especially for the early adopters who get it right. And the sooner that you get it, there's no guarantee guarantee that when universal analytics is removed that you'll be able to merge your data. So for historical data, the earlier you do GA4, the more you'll be able to, kind of analyze when you do ultimately make the move over. Craig Bradford of SearchPilot did a follow-up to some of his winning SEO tests. He put out the 8 losing SEO tests, which I think is really valuable. It's, while it's not definitive, I think these experiments are really interesting to see from what they're testing over at SearchPilot, what doesn't work. And they do this throughout the year where they have an idea and they do a, try to get statistical significance to actually show from a statistical perspective whether these SEO tests work, regardless of all the different factors that are out there that might throw off the results. And some of the most interesting ones, the 3 ones that caught my attention with almost the biggest loss of organic traffic, remember these are the losers, were adding the word video to the titles or of pages containing actual videos. So they found that actually had a 20% decrease. Removing numbers from the title tag. So every time you see those listicles that start a number, they did a test to remove the number. And that actually saw a decrease in the organic traffic as well, approximately 16% decrease. And then the third one was adding prices to title tags. Sometimes with e-commerce, you might think that if you add the price in the title tag, that would make people have a better understanding of what you're selling and then more likely to click it. But in terms of actual rankings, they saw a 15% decrease of that one. So check out the whole article, and then that also has a link to some of the winning tests that they did. Really interesting stuff being done over at SearchPilot. So another Moz article, and Smarty, who runs Viral Content Bee and she consults for a variety of different SaaS products, put together her how to improve organic click-through for your content. Now, what was cool about this post is it dove into a bunch of rich snippets and the opportunity there on how if you earn these various rich snippets, they will give you more visibility in search results and then ultimately might increase the possibility that people actually click through to your site, whether that's using structured data or just having it within the SERPs and not an actual rich snippet, but just a snippet, like site links that show up in your search, how that can help generate more traffic. I loved how she broke it down. A lot of great visuals there. And then actually tapping into that, there was also our own article that Andrew McDermott wrote about how you can use JSON structured data to earn those rich snippets. So those 2 articles actually complement each other. Andrew went through, most of the major use cases of JSON and how you can actually get into the markup, write that up, and make sure that you are at the very least eligible for things like, breadcrumbs or, some variety of recipe, carousel, featured image snippets, logos, that sort of thing. So check out those articles. In the world of technical SEO, so Roman Adamita wrote this awesome guest blog post for Screaming Frog where he looked at millions and millions of log files and analyzed those to determine if there were any sort of trends or themes that he saw when it comes to what Google crawls and ultimately indexes. Specifically, he focused on crawling. Some of the main takeaways that I thought was fascinating and pretty insightful were, for instance, how often is Googlebot crawling the robot's TXT file? So for a 100,000 index page website, he found that Googlebot crawled the robot text file 2,400 times per month, which is interesting. Now, which pages did Googlebot crawl the most? He found that was homepage, naturally, which is what you would expect for any website, the homepage, images, the robot text file, header image, and the 404 page, which was slightly surprising because he actually saw more clicks on some category pages, but those weren't necessarily what Googlebot crawled the most. And then he asked how important is page speed in the context of crawling events, going back to Core Web Vitals, and he found that Googlebot tried to crawl the pages with a lousy LCP score more often. Pages with better LCP scores have more user clicks than others with bad scores. So just because your LCP isn't necessarily great, the largest contentful paint, that doesn't mean that Google isn't going to crawl it. So they'll crawl it. It's still not necessarily the best user experience, and it might be that tiebreaker when it comes to the rankings, but it's not. I mean, there's so many crappy LCP, sites across the web that Google apparently is not penalizing you in terms of their crawl rate. A lot more insights from Roman in that article. Check it out if you want to geek out on some log analysis and technical SEO. Great work. Aleyda Solis updated her learningseo.io website, which is the most ridiculous comprehensive resource when it comes to learning SEO. This was all about implementing SEO for CMSs. Now, the variety of different CMSs out there have different capabilities or limitations when it comes to doing technical SEO or on-page SEO. So she reached out to the community, got some general tips. Actually, our own Mike King, had some ideas around, making sure capabilities around redirect or, meta descriptions, just making sure that your CMS can do that. There was more CMS specific advice around WordPress, Wix, Shopify, Magento, Webflow, Squarespace. So if you use any of those, look at that resource that Aleyda put together. I think it's ridiculously helpful. And this week, there was an awesome episode between Martin Splitt and our own Mike King on SEO and devs and SEOs. This great video series. So for half an hour, Martin and Mike were talking all about Google documentation and how it's a really tricky thing for Google to manage because they can't obviously give too many insights in terms of how the algorithm works. They try to provide their best practices, but it's a large document. It's hard to keep updated. And so Mike was kind of spitting fire at Martin, kind of challenging him about whether it's reliable, whether it's updated enough, and then most importantly, how you need so much context with some of the insights that Google provides. For instance, with like Lighthouse, providing a score can be really complicated when you have different network environments and the score is constantly changing. So is that responsible of Google to provide a score like that? Or how in Google Search Console with clicks, there's a lot of different context that needs to be provided with how those clicks and impressions and in the context of keywords are actually provided. Or not provided. See Mike's shirt, kind of a nice little meme shirt there. Anyway, it was a great conversation. There are a lot of valid points raised, and I think, there's a lot for Google to think about. They're obviously trying their best. They have good intent, but when you're reading that documentation, there's value in understanding what they're trying to do, but also that there might be context missing, hence a lot of SEO world of it depends. And then a major deep dive. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but Koray, Tugberk, Gubur put together for OnCrawl this epic importance of semantic networks for SEO. Semantic SEO gets very theoretical. It's trying to pull out ideas based on Google patents around entities and tying content together from a kind of linguistic understanding and the way that Google uses machine learning and algorithms to understand the relationship between a variety of different things. In this deep dive article, Koray explains a bunch of different concepts, and then he uses a case study of actual implementation to show how these patents and concepts work together to produce topical authority. So really making sure that you are the definitive answer on a topic by producing the right content. But he also gets into like the technical aspect of it, of whether or not you should consider using a fixed side menu across a variety of template pages or not. It's a long, deep read. It's a little dry at some points, but it's really, really smart. So if you're into that, definitely check out Koray's article. Appreciate him putting out these like holistic SEO, semantic SEO articles that are really theoretical, really intelligent, really smart, really hard to understand, but they're fantastic. And then finally, in the world of tools, so really nifty. Wouldn't you love to be able in Google Search Console to be able to see the search volume and CPC data for each of the keywords that you're looking at for your own site? Well, our own director of software engineering, John Murch at iPullrank, put together this nifty little step-by-step tutorial on how you can use the GrepWords keyword database to inject those visually into your Google Search Console. So broke it down step by step on how you can use a little bookmarklet and make that happen. And so then you can use that to inform your SEO strategy more easily, more effectively, just like visually right in front of you. And then for Rankable this week, had Patrick Stox on yesterday. He is kind of product advisor, brand ambassador, works with Ahrefs for a variety of different, ideas. He actually was the lead SEO on the HTTP archive web almanac for the SEO chapter. So we chatted about that. We chatted about how to make the perfect steak, which he'd been working on all pandemic. He cut his hair off. He also talked about the topic, which was prioritizing tech SEO. So whether you're working for a client or you just started a new job, how do you approach what to tackle first using kind of that framework of high priority, easy to do, high priority, takes a while to do, low priority, not easy, low priority, easy, and how to approach those low-hanging fruit. Really great insights from Patrick. Additionally, we did touch on this idea of Core Web Vitals. He does not think it's a major needle mover after all of these months and months and months of focus on CWV and how it's going to be this really big, impactful thing. Google never really said it. They said it was going to be a tiebreaker. And so his opinion is if you've got all these other priorities, all these other bigger fires in the world of your website and SEO and technical SEO, you don't necessarily need to spend all your time trying to boost the page speed. Now, does it help your CRO and the conversion rate? Absolutely. To that point, Patrick suggests maybe that should be championed by your UX team and not your SEO team. So that was a really interesting conversation. Next week, I've got Morty Oberstein, who's the head of communications over at SEMrush. We're going to talk about a range of different things, EAT, Core Web Vitals, whether it's important or not. No, but we're going to talk about how to use SEO data the right way. I'm not sure what Morty means by that. Is there a right way to use SEO? Of course there's a right way to use SEO data. Curious to hear what Morty says. And then just keep your eyes peeled, not next Wednesday, but the following Wednesday. Mike King and Bogdan Mutian of Advanced Web Ranking are doing a really cool webinar all about, year 2 of the pandemic, looking at search demand trends and whether certain industries have recovered or tapered off. They're going to deep dive into some of the macroeconomic potential impact of where we stand. To what extent are people searching for travel and hospitality related keywords at this point? Has e-commerce and shopping kind of tallied off? How about personal finance? Is that been changed at all? It's going to be a really interesting webinar, so you can register for that. That's going to be on Wednesday the 26th at 11 a.m. That's about it. It's another Friday. My name is Garrett Sussman of iPullrank Agency. This has been the SEO Weekly. Thank you again for listening. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed all the bananas things that are happening in the SEO world. I mean, is it all bananas? Is it consequential? Probably not, but we love it. I love it. You can tell that I love it. If you enjoy this, please subscribe to the channel so you get updates. Hit that notification bell so you get the update when this rolls out. And please share it, retweet it, give it some love in the world on the socials and all the things, and leave a comment if you have any questions or any thoughts on anything that I covered. Do you think Core Web Vitals are a needle mover? Should they not be an SEO's focus? I don't know. You tell me. That's it. I will see you next week. I am signing off. Have a great weekend, and keep depending, or it depending, or not depending. I don't know. Whatever I say at the beginning.